In our news tonight, the German Chancellor says the two-state solution remains the only sensible alternative for Palestinians and Israelis. Former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak is freed after a 6-year imprisonment following his overthrow. And French far-right party leader Marine Le Pen reiterates her stand on backing the lifting of EU sanctions on Russia. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. German Chancellor Angela Merkel expressed her concern over Israel's building of settlements in the occupied West Bank. She said it was undermining any progress towards a two-state solution for Palestinians and Israelis. She told visiting Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Berlin that the two-state solution remains the only sensible alternative. Abbas, meanwhile, thanked Germany for what he termed political and material support provided to improve Palestinian institutional structures.
Both the Israeli and the Palestinian people have the right to live in peace and security, and none of the other options can credibly guarantee this. That's why the option to implement the two-state solution must not only be maintained, but we must try again and again, even if it's difficult, and when there are setbacks, to give a positive dynamic to this possibility.
On the ground and near the West Bank city of Ramallah, clashes erupted between Israeli forces and Palestinian youth. Dozens of Palestinians marched in a protest demanding the removal of structures built by settlers on land owned by Palestinians. Israeli forces fired tear gas, rubber and live bullets to disperse the crowd. Last month, Israel's parliament retroactively legalized about 4,000 settler homes built on privately owned Palestinian land. Moving on to the Syrian file, a new round of intra-Syrian negotiations kicked off in Geneva, with UN envoy Staffan de Mistura meeting with the government delegation headed by Bashar al-Ja'fari, while his meeting with the opposition was scheduled for this afternoon. De Mistura said Russia, Iran and Turkey needed to convene more Syrian ceasefire talks as soon as possible to bring the worrisome situation on the ground under control. He also expressed hope that an Astana meeting would be held as soon as possible to contain the situation. A UN spokeswoman said the talks, which are expected to last until April 1st, will focus on governance, constitutional change, UN-sponsored elections and counter-terrorism measures. On the ground, fighting continues as Russian warplanes took part in airstrikes against insurgents to help repel a major attack on Syrian government-held areas near the city of Hama. A Syrian military source said in addition to airstrikes, there is concentrated artillery firing against the armed groups and the headquarters of their leaders and supply lines, paving the way for the counterattack. State media later reported that the army had recaptured all the positions it lost earlier in the week in a rebel assault in the north of the Jobar district of Damascus. Rebel groups were focusing their attack today on the village of Qamhana, some 8 kilometers north of Hama city. The rebel groups launched the attack on Tuesday and have captured at least 11 villages and towns. 5 children were among 11 killed after a plastic boat carrying 22 Syrians to Greece sunk off Turkey's Aegean coast town of Kashadasi. Douane news agency said of the 22 migrants on board, 7 had been rescued, while 3 were still being sought by the Turkish Coast Guard. Authorities had detained 2 Turks suspected of being the organizer of the voyage after they swam ashore. A deal between Turkey and the European Union on curbing illegal immigration, which was struck a year ago, helped reduce the migrant influx to Europe via Greek islands to a trickle. But some are still trying to make the extremely dangerous voyage across the Aegean. Moving to Iraq, Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr called for electoral reform, threatening to order his supporters to boycott the upcoming parliamentary vote scheduled for April 2018. Addressing tens of thousands of people who filled a central Baghdad square, Sadr urged his followers to keep on with their protests to fight corruption. Meanwhile, military officials said Iraqi forces are to deploy new tactics in a fresh push against Daesh group in Mosul. The move came after advances slowed recently in the military campaign against Daesh to drive the group out of their last stronghold in the country. Elite counterterrorism service forces made some advances against Daesh in areas of western Mosul, despite a hold on operations by other units. Former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak was freed today after being cleared this month. Charges against him included conspiring to kill protesters in the 2011 uprising that ended his 30-year rule. More in this Reuters report.
Hosni Mubarak, the former Egyptian president overthrown in a popular uprising at the height of the Arab Spring, walking free after 6 years of detention. That's according to his lawyer, who says he's returned to his home in Cairo. Mubarak had been on trial for a multitude of charges, ranging from corruption during his 30-year rule to the killing of protesters in the revolt that ended it. Originally sentenced to life in prison in 2012, he'd been undergoing appeals until the last of those murder charges were cleared earlier this month. Held in prison and military hospitals under heavy guard and defiant throughout. Mubarak transformed Egyptian politics during his 3 decades in office, turning the country into a force for stability and a major player in the region, continuing the peace process with Israel seen as an affront to other Arab states. But opponents associated his long tenure and the political successes of his sons with soaring food prices and low wages, a widening gap between rich and poor. It culminated when the Arab Spring toppled governments across the region. Mubarak was the first of those leaders to face trial in its wake.
Still in Egypt, 1 man was killed and 3 others injured in an explosion in the Cairo suburb of Maadi. Egypt's Interior Ministry said a building guard who was cleaning the property's garden found an unidentified metallic object. Upon holding it, it exploded, resulting in his death and the injury of his wife and 2 children by shrapnel. The injured have been moved to the hospital for treatment, and the area had been cordoned off and is being combed by security forces. There was no immediate claim of responsibility. 5 migrants were found dead in the Sea of Libya after the boats they were traveling in sank. Another 200 could be missing. According to Proactiva Open Arms, a Spanish aid group operating rescue operations in the area, it was notified that an inflatable boat was sinking early yesterday, while another was found going down shortly afterwards. A rising number of migrants is attempting to cross the central Mediterranean this year after a deal between the European Union and Turkey largely shut down a route to Greece. Elsewhere, London police released an undated mugshot of Khalid Masood, the man responsible for Britain's deadliest attack since the 2005 London bombings. The 52-year-old plowed down pedestrians with a hired car when he sped across Westminster Bridge before running into the parliamentary grounds and fatally stabbing an unarmed policeman before being shot dead by police. Before Wednesday's attack, Masood, who used several aliases, was considered by the intelligence officers to be a criminal who posed little serious threat. However, he had shown up on the periphery of previous terrorism investigations that brought him to the attention of Britain's M15 spy agency. So far, British police have made 2 significant arrests in their investigation and had 9 others in custody. The death toll of the terror attack claimed by Daesh rose to 5 this morning, as a seriously injured 75-year-old citizen died at the hospital. Following her meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Kremlin, French far-right party leader Marine Le Pen reiterated her stand on backing the lifting of European Union's economic sanctions imposed on Russia over its role in the Ukraine conflict. Speaking to reporters after her meeting with Putin, Le Pen denied that she had discussed financial aid for her party. Le Pen's ties to Russia have been subject to intense scrutiny after her party took a €9 million loan from a Moscow-based bank in 2014 and is actively seeking new sources of funding. In France, voters are still struggling over who to choose for their next president. This report has the latest.
It's only a month until the first round of France's presidential election, but nearly half of voters still aren't sure who to back. An opinion poll by Adoxa for France Info Radio finding 43% are hesitating between several candidates, reflecting an unprecedented uncertainty in French electoral history and underlining a volatile campaign. Polls show independent centrist Emmanuel Macron and far-right leader Marine Le Pen are likely to lead in the first round, heading to a May runoff, where an easy win is predicted for Macron.
Vive la République! Vive la France!
But the ballot box for the left is looking shaky. Voters for right-wing candidates, Le Pen and embattled conservative François Fillon, are more settled in their choices. 60% of Le Pen's potential supporters have definitely decided, and 57% of Fillon's, comparing with 47% of Macron's and less than 45% for leading left-wing contenders. Fillon, once the front-runner, has been slipping in popularity since reports surfaced in January, alleging he paid his wife with public funds for work she may not have done. He's accused President François Hollande of being involved in a government plot to spread damaging media leaks. Voters have until April 23rd to make up their minds.
In major U.S. news, U.S. President Donald Trump's healthcare vote was withdrawn after Republicans in Congress said they lacked the votes needed to pass the bill. It was meant to repeal Obamacare and replace it with a more limited federal healthcare insurance program. House of Representatives Speaker Paul Ryan told U.S. President Donald Trump in a meeting with him that there were not enough votes to pass the plan. Two spacewalking astronauts ventured outside the International Space Station. Shane Kimbrough and Thomas Pesquet's spacewalk is expected to last 6 hours and is the first of 3 that the ISS Expedition 50 crew member will take to ready the space station for future commercial crew missions. According to NASA, they are preparing the pressurized mating adapter 3 for removal from the Tranquility module to the Harmony module. Computer relay boxes will also be replaced with software updates for future docking of commercial crew vehicles. The second spacewalk is scheduled for March 30th, with Kimbrough being joined by NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson.
It's not a jetpack where they can zip around the station and maneuver.
We have reached our fitness and well-being segment. If you have watched The Last Samurai, then you probably remember the training scene between Nathan, played by Tom Cruise, and his master Ujiyu, when Tom Cruise shifts his thinking of what his next move will be to feeling Ujiyu's movements. That training scene is of Kendo, a Japanese sword-fighting martial art. Its core values combine the notions of the physical, intellectual, and spiritual. More on Kendo and its practice in Jordan in this report. You think you see students in robes and armor with bamboo swords who train for openings in each other's guards, combined with warlike screams. But Kendo, the way of the sword, is not just what you see. Kendo, the Japanese martial art of sword fighting, is a lifelong pursuit, a tool for self-improvement. The honing and polishing comes only with age. A Kenshi, a swordsman who begins as a child, will likely peak in their 60s. Kendo's concept is said to be a way to discipline the human character through the application of the principles of the katana, the long single-edged sword used by the Japanese samurai.
It's a descendant from the Japanese martial art in which samurai used to apply their swordsmanship skills, and it also survived until our modern day. And it's huge in Japan and all over the world. I love the history of it, and also because unlike boxing, for instance, or other martial arts, it's more towards building your own mental fortitude. You become one with your mind and spirit.
Kendo might look physically soft, but in order to keep going, it requires mental strength. It will train one that their physical limitation is not really a limitation. It will develop a sense of not quitting and keep going, patience and confidence. During a practice, the sensei teacher will force students to walk the fine line between fatigue and total exhaustion. Crossing swords with a strong opponent gives rise to what are called the four sicknesses, namely fear, doubt, surprise, and confusion. Learning to overcome those is a lesson to be applied anywhere in life. This effectively makes the Kenshi better people.
It's my passion, it's my lifestyle. I apply in everything, in all my life aspects, at home, at work, and studying everywhere.
Kendo makes you really peaceful and not like being a bully. For me, it's the disciplined martial arts. There's like all those rules that you need to applicate.
Today in Japan, the full contact sport of Kendo is part of the educational system's curriculum. In Jordan, Kendo officially started in 2010, and while it is still not so popular in the country, annual seminars continue to be held for its practitioners, and it remains the most organized in the region.
I would say we are the organized country so far, beside Tunis. In Jordan, we have Jordan Kendo Federation. We are under Jordan Judo Federation umbrella. We also all under Jordan Olympics committee.
One of the most prized benefits of Kendo is etiquette. It cultivates decisiveness, bravery, loyalty, devotion to duty, and cunningness. It also builds character. But what really sets Kendo practitioners apart is their drive to do the right thing. Kendo's ultimate purpose is to forever pursue the cultivation of oneself, which will enable an individual to truly love one's country and society, be a contributor to the development of culture, and to promote peace and prosperity among all people. Kendo is wellness. If it has touched you, then follow its way. If not, let its wisdom guide and nudge you towards improving your wellness in what makes your heart beat. Choose to live a better quality of life today, as our tomorrows are decreasing by the day. To a richer today and more fulfilling tomorrows, this is Dana Abu Sham for the News at 10. In tennis qualifier, Frances Tiafoe battled past unseeded Konstantin Kravchuk in 3 sets yesterday to set up a meeting with 4th seed Roger Federer at the Miami Open. American Tiafoe, currently the 101st ranked player in the world by the ATP, got past Russian Kravchuk, ranked 103rd, 7-5, 5-7, 6-1 in an opening round match in the Masters 1000 Series tournament. The win advanced the 19-year-old Tiafoe into a second round match with someone nearly twice his age in the 35-year-old Federer, who is currently ranked 6th in the world. Three times world champion Lewis Hamilton put Mercedes on top of the timesheets in free practice at the season-opening Australian Grand Prix, leaving his Formula One rivals with plenty to ponder before the race weekend. Hamilton led new teammate Valtteri Bottas of Finland in a Mercedes 1-2 in the first session and raised the pace in the second to be comfortably quicker than Ferrari's second fastest, Sebastian Vettel of Germany, on a cloudy day at Albert Park. The Britain's fastest lap in the second session of 1 minute, 23.62 seconds was more than half a second clear of 4-time world champion Vettel, who edged Bottas into third. Vettel's 2007 championship-winning teammate Finn Kimi Raikkonen was 4th fastest in the final session, improving on his 5th placing earlier. And finally, the weather outlook. Relatively cold conditions continue across the kingdom for the rest of tonight, with partly cloudy skies and northwesterly light winds. Moderate conditions prevail in most regions tomorrow, with a high of 20 degrees Celsius in Amman, while winds will be northwesterly moderate. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect moderate conditions tomorrow, with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. Before we end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel says the two-state solution remains the only sensible alternative for Palestinians and Israelis. Former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak is freed after a 6-year imprisonment following his overthrow. And French far-right party leader Marine Le Pen reiterates her stand on backing the lifting of EU sanctions on Russia. With this, we end tonight's news. I'm Dana Abu Sham. Thanks for watching and have a good night.